Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to the season finale of Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of western Georgia on this June 3rd, 2025. Tonight, we talk about the wisdom of Africa, particularly the Proverbs that relate to scriptural messages. Things that demonstrate a parallel between two seemingly different cultures. And we have a wonderful new guest tonight, Chris Morehouse, to talk about it. I think this should be something that we haven't done before, something new and exciting, and I can't wait to share it all with each and every one of you, so don't go anywhere. Well, hello, everybody. Once again, I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, here with my co-host, Jamie Wolf.
Hey.
And this is it, the season finale, minus 2 episodes. You know, we lost them to technical issues and everything else going on this season. That should all be resolved by the time we enter the next season. And even the summer specials should be better because
we're going out with a good one.
We are going out with a good one.
So,
but we should have fiber. We should have fiber the next time we do a show. So that will fix everything. I think that will fix everything. Yeah, God willing is right. So it's been a great season, and we've had some wonderful guests. And the good news is that you're not missing any of the guests that we had set up for you. There was really only one that we had to reschedule for outside the season, and she was good with coming back for, or coming on, I should say, for the summer special. So we will have a full docket. Everybody that was set up for this year will have a show this year. So it's not so bad. You know, we got around it, and I try to leave always at least a couple episodes open just in case we have problems.
And we got to quite a few different subjects and new guests that we've never talked about. So kudos to Brandon for setting all that up.
Yeah, we definitely need to give Brandon a big thank you for that, because it's a lot of work. Believe me, I know. I used to do it.
Yeah.
And it can be tough to find reliable people to show up. And that was it. That was what we had. One guest that didn't show up this season. But, you know, one out of all the ones we booked is not too bad, and that doesn't happen too often. But it's been a good season, and a lot of topics that we've never covered before. So really exciting to do, and more coming up in the fall. So you don't definitely want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And, you know, YouTube's the best place, of course, because that's where all the action is. So anyway, joining us from Australia, we have Father Chris Yates. How are you doing tonight, Father, on this season finale?
Hello.
Yeah, I'm good. Hey, good to see you back, Jamie.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we're kind of, obviously, like in Australia, we're transitioning to winter. So it's sort of, we're kind of at opposite mood flows.
Yeah, it must be weird because,
kind of,
yeah.
It feels like kind of hibernation season to me.
We're brightening up
I still
and
feel
you're
that real
down.
pull. Yeah, exactly. So, but I'm pleased to see that Brandon and I coordinated today, because he's got a nice stuffed mallard in the background there, and I've got one on my cup.
There.
Nice.
So,
yes.
You know,
I noticed
so
that. I
we're doing
noticed
our
that
bit.
duck last time.
Handsome mallard.
duck that side and a pheasant that side.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
My two favorite birds to eat.
Absolutely.
I had a pet mallard at my pond.
Oh yeah,
but they were taken. Most likely by a coyote.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I've got three big ones now.
Like in England, people thought pheasant was like, aristocratic food and expensive and all the rest of it. But I grew up on the edges of Manchester where, pheasant is cheaper than chicken.
Yeah, really?
So,
it's funny. It's the same thing with think about, all throughout the Victorian era, Christmas goose was the thing because it was the cheap food, right? Cheap. Turkey was impossible. Only the rich could get turkey, right? And now it's like you can get a turkey for like $25, but a goose is $125. It's like it's the way it goes. Same thing with lobster.
That was prisoner food.
It was prisoner food. I mean, that was just basically
oysters.
Yeah, oysters too,
were for merchant seamen. It was just like what they ate when they were in port because nobody wanted to eat them.
Right.
Look, here in the South, we got oxtails.
Yeah.
That was throwaway food. That was slave food. Oxtails are expensive now.
Ribs are throwaway food. The reason that
I blame TV chefs. I blame TV chefs for all of this.
It probably is their fault.
The cheapest fish in England used to be John Dory, right? And then all of a sudden, Rick Stein, John Dory, do this. Now John Dory is the most expensive fish you can buy in England.
There's definitely
crazy.
Probably an influence.
Well, they do it. Yeah. It creates false scarcity, everything else. But here in the South, barbecue, which is basically it comes to us in the current form as what the slaves ate.
Yeah.
And the reason that they did barbecue and still do barbecue so well is because that's what the slave owners would throw them. They'd have the big roasts.
You'd have to cook it low and slow to get it to tenderize.
And now, I don't think there's anybody that would choose a roast over a rack of ribs. It's like,
I'd do both.
Well, I know, but let's face it, ribs are damn good.
There's something about gnawing on a bone.
There's something about the bone.
Primal about that, yeah.
So it's like, I'd be like, hey, give me the ribs. You can have the roast.
Yeah.
Big time. Big time.
Absolutely. All right. Joining us also from Tennessee, we have Brandon Milam. How you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm pretty good. Like I said in the chat, I'm kind of disappointed the season's already over, but I think for your health and your mental well-being, we should get a whole lot more scheduled.
Yeah, well, it was a shorter winter spring season than usual. Typically, we have closer to 15 episodes. This year, I think with the late Easter, and the technical issues.
Yeah.
We lost some of it, but hey, it's the way it goes. We'll have more coming, but there is always a Vestiges every month of the year. There's not always one every week, but there's one every month of the year. So there will be a summer special in July 8th, I think is the next one. And then there'll be another one on August 19th, I think it is. So there's 2 summer specials. And then in the end of September, we come back again for the fall season. Now, that's always a smaller season, but, we usually can get at least 8 or 10 episodes in, I think. So it's not so bad when you think about it. And look, it felt like we just finished January, and now here we are in June,
Well, after we got through 75 days of January,
I know,
the year's gone by fast after that.
It really did feel like 75.
Time slowed down the first month, and then it's been a whirlwind since.
It really did. That January was long, and then now it's like, here we are. It's June. It's crazy. So anyway, we rest, but we're never entirely gone. I was telling Jamie, it's like if I think I said this before, if I could just come in and sit down at the microphone and start talking, I could do this every night of the week. But having to engineer it, I'm willing to, I'm going to pull my hair out. I'm going to, it's too much. It's just too much. So anyway, let's get started with questions from the ether. What do you have for us tonight, Brandon?
So this first one, it's kind of a double whammy question. The first is, within the biblical context, has God always been understood as omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent? And the second question is there a tradition within the narrative of Abraham and Isaac where Abraham did go through with sacrificing Isaac?
I mean, these are things that were speculated upon and developed into mass consciousness over time. I mean, I don't think these were explicitly stated at any point, but that came about much later with the development of, or I should say, the integration of Greek philosophy with Judeo-Christian theology. So, but they were vaguely understood to be these things. I mean, it was very clear that you're dealing with a God that had omnipotence. I mean, I think that's implied by most of what's in the Old Testament. Omnipresence is also somewhat implied because, I mean, God's always there. Omniscient, well, he seems to always know everything, right? So I think it's implied, not maybe explicitly stated in those terms, but it's definitely something that developed into the more modern, sophisticated philosophy that we apply to theology today. And as far as your second question goes, there are texts within the Midrash that do explore alternative outcomes to the Abraham-Isaac sacrifice. It's not obviously authoritative in a canonical sense, but the cool thing I think about Jewish theologians is that they were never afraid to explore. They were always willing to kind of step outside of the categories and the boxes that we tend to put ourselves in with religion. They've always been really good at that, and they're really good at that today. But overall, yeah, I mean, because Jewish understanding of the Old Testament is very different than how the typical Christian tends to understand it. We tend to, even in the Catholic Church, tend to take more of a historical approach to it. The Jewish people tend to look at it more as story lessons that are to be taught through a literary device. And so all of the characters and references and events that take place in the Old Testament are literary devices to convey deep theological meanings. And I think that, that's been lost a lot in Christianity. I mean, of course, sophisticated Catholic and Orthodox theologians understand this, but, the further away you get from that core, the worse it gets. And I've even known Catholics that do look at the Old Testament in purely historical terms, and they're fully expecting to find Noah's Ark out there. I mean, I think that's kind of silly. And there's people that are still looking, and there's people that claim they found it. And
that satellite image does look like a boat, and it meets the parameters set forth in the Bible.
Oh, the one on our
they drilled in there and found wood
in Turkey.
Yeah,
Ararat is it?
Ararat, yeah.
But the correlation is not necessary. I mean, there are going to be dehydrated shipwrecks all over the place.
It's interesting.
I mean, it's Noah's Ark, right? But I mean, right. I think there's a connection by the way between these two things, even though it doesn't seem so. And it's along the lines of what you're saying. My approach to theology, well, not my approach, an approach to theology, which Thomas Aquinas was much. The Thomistic tradition says you should take things to their limit. So. In the case of God, I mean, we all know the sort of classical unmoved mover, the uncreated creator, you take it to its logical conclusion without any of the biblical revelation or any other prophetic revelation, just the philosophical idea of a God. If there is a God, then that presumes there can only be one, because if something's equal to God, then there's no God. And so that's where omnipotence, omniscience comes from. Mm-hmm. There has to be the final principle upon which which is not dependent on any other principle, mm-hmm. Or what Thomas Aquinas called begins with C. Come on, anyway. The one on whom all of the things are contingent. And so you just take it to its limit, to its logical limit. If we presuppose there's a God, then in the end you end up with those conclusions. And similarly, in the midrash and or with any story actually, not just biblical stories, with any story, this is just as important when you're analyzing modern culture, like films, like, what's wrong with the new Snow White film, for example? Well, you have to take everything to its logical conclusion, and so the sort of rabbinic approach to this in the what we call the Old Testament is, of course, to presuppose different outcomes. So how could this have gone every one of these ways? And by doing that, you actually find a deeper meaning in the one that's been handed on to us. That's sort of like the apophatic tradition, where you look at the negative rather than the positive. Look at what cannot be, and that reveals what is. Like, remember what those images you used to stare at, and your eyes went blurry, and then the 3D
Magic
image
Eye.
popped out.
Magic Eye.
Yeah. They were big in the 80s and 90s.
Tracy can't do it. Tracy can't do it.
You ever headache? Or?
No, she does. She can't see them.
Oh,
she
wow.
can't see them.
Yeah.
Some people can't see them.
Took me a long time to get it, but
it took me a while. I guess it did.
And that's an approach we should. To be honest, there's a balance on these things, right? What do the Orthodox say? Ask your priest, because we can actually do this too much within our own lives, like so taking it away from scriptural analysis.
Yeah.
If we just completely, dissect our own thoughts, actions, intentions, impulses, we end up in a kind of anxious mess that can't do anything. And so that's why actually, being grounded in the biblical tradition, in the traditions of the church, or in the traditions of Judaism, if you're a Jew, actually helps you to be less anxious, to be more effective at managing the sort of busy thoughts that come through your head.
Yeah.
So, so that's the connection. I encourage people, take it to the limits, but best to do so under guidance.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, when we go it alone and you don't have anyone to hold you accountable, the ego tends to run wild with that kind of scenario. And people feel that they're almost entitled to that kind of freedom, just on virtue of the fact that they get possessive of their own spiritualities to the point that they think that they know better. And, you can't dismiss 2,000 years of some of the most brilliant minds just because, your modern sensibilities and your ego reality are telling you something different. I think you need to be held accountable. That's another reason why church is not optional. It's necessary, because we are so good at diluting ourselves that religion is the perfect playing ground for that kind of self-deception. And we have to be careful of that. The church is there to help us not fall into that trap. But, if you always think you know better, well, then even if you go to church, that might not help much. I know there's a lot of people that think they can go and listen to a sermon and decide whether or not they agree with it. And I've known many times I have given a sermon where somebody comes up to me, I really agreed with what you said today. It's like, well, good. You're supposed to.
Back in the Twitter days, man, it was like every homily had to be questioned by some
every time
keyboard warrior.
Yeah. And it's like you're missing the whole point of the homily. You don't understand in persona Christi. You don't understand the guidance of the Holy Spirit. You don't understand the level of thought and theology that goes into preparing a homily. These are not optional things. Okay, now sometimes
they don't understand how naked they look when they ask questions. Like,
that's true,
because their reflections say more about their own psychology than they do about anything else.
They do. It does.
Be very careful when you're in that mode. Like, even if especially if you've been angered by something someone said in a homily, like, be careful, because if you start putting that out there, people are going to know what's going on in your mind. Like, it's.
I do try. Every time I do a very conversational kind of homily. I don't write them out. I don't do a speech. I prefer to just sort of go with what the message is for that mass and what feels right in discernment. So naturally, there's going to be times where personal perspective comes into a homily, and I try in those moments to point that out and say, well, in my opinion, or in my experience, this is what I have found to be true. But when I'm teaching theology, that's not an option for you to choose to believe it. If you're a Christian, this is the teaching. You take it or leave it, but don't say I'm going to stay Christian, but I disagree with you. Well, okay, then you disagree with God and everybody that came after that gave us this information. So that's really problematic, right?
Well, it's because we've been caught in this ever since modernity.
Yeah.
I think, therefore I am. It's like, who do you think you are? Why do you think you're so important? I mean, you're precious and loved by God, but your thoughts, your feelings, you're squiffy. I am. It's what, I mean, really, the only preachers to look out for are the ones that don't submit to any authority at all, because they are literally just telling you what they want to tell you to manipulate you.
That's true.
And this goes on in mainstream churches now. I mean, if you hear in Episcopalian churches, I know I'm sorry to pick on them, but
well, I mean, you have personal experience there to a degree.
I've got previous skin in the game.
Yeah.
But if you hear at an Episcopalian church, the sort of vacuous parroting of postmodern mantra in a homily, it might make them popular amongst their Ivy League subset of very strange old white people, but it's not the truth.
Yeah.
And actually, if you're more comfortable listening to lies, you've got some deep work to do.
Well, there's a place, time and place for it. I mean, there's you can have programs in your parish where you have like study groups, and that is the time to debate and maybe speculate and get into some, heated conversation. But the homily is not one of them. That's not one of those times where that's to be debated.
It's the gospel, guys.
It is. I mean, you're teaching the gospel. Presumably, your priest knows what he's talking about. At least, you hope so. And only if you suspect heresy, well, then you report to your bishop. But I mean, But I disagree with what you said. It's like. You disagree with Christ? I mean, he's the one that said it. I'm just the messenger. Don't hold me accountable. Go complain to him. He's the one that said it first.
And this problem's as old as the church, because St. Paul has to write about it, right? Oh, I'm for Apollo. I'm for Paul. I'm for Christ. It's a sort of that dynamic. This is it's a human failing. It is.
It is. So
I'm graceful about it, but I hear this a lot, especially from American politicians, I'm afraid to say. But I'm a Catholic, and then they say something that is absolutely not the Catholic faith.
Always the but.
It's like, so you're not a Catholic,
right?
What you mean is you were baptized in a Catholic church by a Catholic priest, but you're free to choose or not choose. We're not absolutists. You can choose or not choose, but don't say you are if you're not. Different things saying I am a Catholic and I'm a sinner and I fail at these things. I find this difficult.
Different.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's actually that is being a Catholic, right?
Yeah,
if you're not guilty, you're not a Catholic. And so
it's true. It's true.
So, but to say I'm positively believing, practicing something which the Catholic Church has absolutely said is incompatible with the Catholic faith, you need to be honest. You need to be honest with yourself, and the fact that you deceive other people for political gain, well, I'll let God deal with that.
Yeah, that makes it even more.
That's God's. That becomes God's arena at that point. But I pity them. I do. I pity people that put themselves into that situation. They got a rude awakening coming. What's our next one, Brandon?
So the next one is, on a previous episode of Vestiges, Jamie had mentioned an encounter with a jinn. To my understanding, they have origins in Islamic beliefs. If most entities are our own projections, how did one of those end up in the States, assuming the encounter was in the States?
Okay, so it was not in the States. The client in question, and Jamie can give you even more detail because she was the one that was the direct contact for that case.
That case haunts me.
He was a child living in Saudi Arabia at the time, And when he was a child, somewhere around 9 years old, I think it was, 10 maybe, he disappeared into the Arabian desert for 3 days. No one knew where he was. And then suddenly he emerged and didn't speak for a long time. What he remembered as an adult telling this story to us was that the last thing he recalled before, when he was out there, was this shadow coming up from the sand dunes, approaching him from a distance, and then overshadowed him, and then he had no memory after that. They then later moved to the United States as an adult, where he proceeded to exhibit increasing signs of demonic oppression and possession, which prompted his Muslim mother to reach out to us because her mosque didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. And so she tried us, and of course we try to help everybody, and so we came out to work with him. Unfortunately, he ended up in prison because part of the behaviors that he was exhibiting lend itself to criminality, and he died before we could work with him. So again, to finish the work that we started with him. But I want to make clear on this, we can talk a little more about that case, but I want to make clear that elementals are not projections, okay? How we perceive them is the projection. But the elemental themselves is not a projection of the human psyche. These things exist independently of us in the same way that we exist independently of them. Or if you want to make it more practical, the way that I exist separately from the birds in my backyard. We're both living beings, but we're not integrated in any particular way. I'm not projecting those birds out there. They're not projecting me. And the same thing goes with elementals. But how we see them, and this is because the brain does try to take incorporeal data using its archetypal database and create an image that can be related to something that has no corporeal form. This is how we get the classic imagery of demons. Demons don't have an appearance, but they will usually all look similarly to each other, or even the same demon will appear to several different people and look the same way, because the archetypal database through which our brains try to apply information to something that is largely beyond its understanding and has no physical form to reference will create an archetypal image of what we would think a demon should look like. So that's kind of how this works. But that does not imply that elementals are projections. It's just how we see them, how they might appear to us. Like, for example, the Fae, little fairies, flying around. What we see, and when people say they've encountered these things, is a projection of something that has no physicality. And so the brain implants an image for it to reference, and it's usually from the archetypal database of the collective unconscious. But you want to talk a little more about that case, because you worked with him more than I did.
Yeah. This is the case that got away. So this young man was so talented, had such a great heart, but he definitely was being manipulated by a jinn. We went out there several times, got a lot of good evidence on our equipment. This thing would take him over and speak through him, and it was very arrogant, very dismissive towards us. Told us we weren't going to be able to get rid of it. Didn't like me at all. They never do.
They always hate you.
They always hate me.
Yeah, you're the most hated thing in the
good. So
in the infernal world.
Yeah, well, I'll take that badge of honor. So, but we caught tape where when this thing came through him, we've
had hands on the SLS camera coming out of mirrors, grabbing her neck. I mean, they hate her. Sorry. Go ahead.
Right back at you. Like I said,
I think I ought to say that that's a good sign, because
I don't
spent
fear
time
him.
with Jamie.
I don't fear him, and it pisses me.
Jamie's a really nice person to hang out with.
I've been known to talk a little
just for
shit.
the record.
Yeah, I've been known to talk a little shit to him. But anyway, this guy, when he would speak through our client, I don't know what happened to the video. I think it may have gotten taken by one of
It was stolen by former team members.
Yeah, his face, there'd be clear background, but his face would if you've ever seen, I can't remember what show it is, where you see someone's face and they just, it would do that on the camera every time this thing would take over. It was very disturbing. We could feel it. It would challenge us. We tried several times to set up more investigations with him. We even had a special trap made. Remember that?
Oh, we still have it.
Yeah, we still
the
have
demon
it.
trap.
We weren't able to use it because part of what this manipulation was he was encouraging him to use hallucinogenic drugs, and he became rather violent on them, and he would get into a fight with his then girlfriend, who was kind of a manipulator too. Yeah, if I'm being honest, and he would end up getting arrested. So we set up a time where we were going to come out there with the trap, and we were going to try and resolve this thing.
That trap was built for him, that case, yeah.
And unfortunately, when I called to get the date set, his mom told me that he had been picked up and for family violence and was taken to jail, and he was in there for quite a while. He did get sent to a halfway house, and the thing had been telling him through him that he was going to take him, that he was going to kill him. Well, he was halfway to getting out and coming back to the streets, and his mom called me and bawling and saying that he had passed away. He was literally walking out of a building down the sidewalk and dropped. This kid was in his early 20s.
I mean, it was like a heart attack, but no real reason for it.
No real reason. He was healthy. I mean, this kid was young. He was healthy.
But that's what happens a lot with jinn. If they do not get removed, it usually does seem to end with the demise of the host.
Yeah, and this is something that had been with him since he was a child. Yeah. So, that's one that will always haunt me.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate case, and this is part of the problem is that some of these things take a very long time to resolve, and when you don't have the full cooperation of the victim, there's only so much that you can do, and then there was the religion barrier here. We didn't have any of this was not a baptized individual. So, the tools of the church were very limited. And of course he had no desire for baptism. So it wasn't even an option. Yeah. So we had to really go about this from a completely, occult point of view.
I think it was the first time we had been to the apartment. That's where we had like the ovulus, or we had a disembodied voice say either "get out of here" or something to that effect, and I'm the only one that heard it. Yeah, but I think one of our former team members caught it.
One of the recording devices.
You were trying to give him, I think, just a simple blessing, and the thing came through. He gave you that real, like a Joker smile. And his eyes were just, I mean, anybody that's ever seen someone get possessed, when they're possessed. Yeah. And, this was a legit case.
He was perfectly fine until I hit him with the first drop of holy water.
And that's when it went south. Yeah, it did he was not happy. Yeah. But, yeah, that's a tough one. And the mother, I kept in touch with the mother for about a year after he had passed away, and she did give us permission to talk about his case whenever it came up as a learning experience, that these things are real, and it took her son, her only son.
That was her only child, right? Yeah, yeah. It was a terrible case, terrible. I mean,
that's one I wish I could go back to.
Yeah, but what I mean, we did everything we could do. Yeah, it's not like we could have done anything differently.
So this stuff's real. It affects people. It kills people. So the jin's
not to be messed with.
Dangerous entity.
A very difficult thing to work with, too, because they don't always respond well to the church either, to the tools of the church, although there is more of an integration there than some other elementals. But the reason that jinn are so problematic is because you're dealing with a high intellectual energy system. It's extremely intelligent. And
we're little playthings to them.
We are. Humanity is looked at as basically just chess pieces. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, to a Muslim, a jinn is a demon. Mm-hmm. It's their version of it, more or less. But they are different than how we would classify a fallen angel, which is why we put them into the elemental category, because they're not fallen angels. They're part of the created world, but the incorporeal side, and much more ancient than humanity itself. They were here long before we got here. Yeah. So there you go. Any questions about that, Brandon? I don't know. I don't want to go on to the next one. Now we've gone down that dark corridor. I'm sure that opened a can of worms.
Everybody's depressed. And like, dang.
I know. Yeah, that wasn't the happiest story, is it?
No, it wasn't. They don't always end well, guys.
They don't.
Yep.
You know.
Well, we know from the scriptures that there are other, what we would call preternatural beings.
Yes, preternatural.
You have in Genesis 6, the sons of God, that
Nephilim?
mate with the women, and they produce the Nephilim, right? The giants. So
Yeah, people will try to make that out to be fallen angels. I do not agree with that. I think that is a complete.
Oh no, I think that's a category error.
It is. Yeah.
I think that's a category error. But so we don't really. I always kind of hesitate to. On this show, I can mention it, but you hesitate to talk about these things because they're the things that people will then spend the next 20 years of their life focusing on that instead of pick up your cross and follow me.
The things that matter. Yeah. That's the problem with the paranormal. I do find is that it does sort of take the front seat, and all of the theological stuff just gets thrown in the trunk somewhere.
It's a great way to procrastinate your spiritual life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the danger of the paranormal.
It also is kind of an addiction for some people to investigate and get evidence, and
it's a high.
Not even do anything with it. It
becomes their religion.
It's a high.
It becomes their religion.
Yeah.
But there's a euphoria to it. There's an adrenaline rush to it.
Especially when you get really good evidence. But, are you helping anything? Are you making the situation better, or are you just going in there and stirring stuff up?
Yeah, most of the time it's the latter.
Yeah.
In our experience.
And are you making Christians?
Yeah.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing that's the biggest issue, because a lot of people will say, well, what do you do, in your ministry? And the fact is, when you look at the people that get helped, and I always say this, we have a 100% success rate with the people who listen to us.
If you listen.
If you listen to us. If you don't listen, I would say it's about a 90% failure rate. I can usually still help a small amount, but overall, a lot of this requires some kind of spiritual commitment. You're coming to a Catholic church for help. So naturally, the solution I'm going to provide is going to be a Catholic solution. And so if you're not interested in a Catholic solution, well, then why are you coming to me in the first place? Maybe you need to go find someone that has a solution that's more, your cup of tea. But my reality in terms of how I look at this is that, I can only work as a facilitator. I can only do as much as you allow me to do. I can only facilitate your relationship to God. I can't do it for you. As an exorcist, as a priest, as a pastor, every aspect of that is facilitation. The relationship with God has to come from you. You have to make it.
Because it's based on freedom.
Yes.
That's the ultimate difference. No matter how twisted Christians and Christian sects can become.
Yeah.
It is fundamentally based on a free decision, a free choice.
Correct.
And that is what's distinctive.
Yes.
Because some people say and I understand why, to certain groups of Christians, oh, you sound just like the Taliban. It's like, yeah, the difference is though that our religion, our practice, our philosophy leads a very different way. So, it's based on truth, and so it doesn't kind of lead to the real dark side that sects like the Taliban can go down. So, but yeah, it's based upon freedom.
That's it. One's based on control. One's based on freedom.
And we're not magicians.
No, we're not wizards. We're not
the church's representatives.
We're not sorcerers. This is not sorcery. It's faith. And in order to work with faith, it requires relationship. And if you're the one with the problem, then you're the one that needs to work on your relationship. The priest can't do it for you. The exorcist can't do it for you. And in these kinds of situations, you're only as good as the person that wants help. So here, the problem we see in this ministry is that when people come to us for help because they're desperate, and they find out that, I'm not going to rush in there with crosses and holy water and start, doing solemn rites of exorcism to satisfy, their expectation, but actually start talking about having a relationship with Christ. And
people get disappointed about that. When I tell them when I do the interview with a candidate or a client, and they immediately go straight to exorcism, and I said, "You're not even a candidate for exorcism," and they're like, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, you're not under demonic possession." And they're like, "But I need an exorcism."
So
no, sweetheart, you do not need an exorcism.
They want to be possessed.
They want to be. Yeah, they think that's. It's like no.
And I'm thinking to myself,
they're looking for a shortcut too.
Yeah.
They want a shortcut.
They do. They want a shortcut, but they also want, I think, a little entertainment.
And they're flabbergasted when I refer them to secular counseling.
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't
they're
like that one.
flabbergasted. They don't want to hear that. But this is spiritual. Okay.
And they really don't like. We lose, I'd say, about at least 2/3, if not more, 3/4 perhaps, of our caseload just by telling them that you're not even going to be considered for exorcism until we have a full psychological workup on you.
Psychological workup,
and a medical one too.
Physical. Hey, on a side note, hopefully they don't mind me speak. I'm going to keep it very generic. So this is why it's so important for people to get current medical and psychological exams when they come to us having these symptoms. So we had a client that came to us a few months ago, and they were referred by someone in our group, and I spoke with that individual, real nice young man, having hallucinations, all kinds of symptoms of which could be oppression. And I through talking to him, I found out that he did have a severe substance abuse problem, but he had been clean for a month and was working on getting healthy again. And I said, look, 6 months straight, get yourself a medical exam, make sure it's nothing medical, and contact us back. And I recently found out through our contact that he did go to the doctor, and they found a brain tumor. So thank God he's being treated, and I pray for him. But, that's one reason why it's so important, because it's not always a demon, guys. It's not always spiritual.
And a lot of physiological things like
people
brain
just want
disorder.
to dismiss the medical part. You cannot do that.
A neurological or brain disorder, some kind of thing of that, can absolutely produce hallucinations that feel very real.
Hearing voices, and feeling chicken skin when there's no one around, all that stuff.
And a lot of that will manifest to you as a spiritual experience, and often a negative one. So that's why we have to be careful, because you don't know.
You got to vet it out.
We do, and I don't have the time to waste on cases that I don't have definitive, at least some reasonable expectation that they actually do need me. Yeah, you know what I mean.
But the spiritual is not separable from the physiological and the psychological.
No,
so even the suggestion that no, what I need is an exorcism. This is a spiritual problem, not a psychological one. You think, okay, there's a lot of teaching's got to happen here.
Yeah.
You can't. We're embodied souls. Even if you take a really kind of, as I do, ultra sort of traditionalist view of humanity, we're embodied souls, and that means that our souls are not separate from our bodies. They interact with one another, and so, yeah. I'm kind of ultra traddy on this stuff. The first thing I say is, are you a baptized Christian?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, well, that's where we've got to start.
Just had a client. We had that conversation today, as a matter of fact.
I bet that didn't go well.
That's where we've got to start.
Actually, he wants to be baptized.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a good. See, like I said, there's always a surprise, and there's one for me today.
I have to say, my experience, anecdotally, is that almost all of them then want to be baptized, and so
that's interesting.
But I don't shortcut that either. They have to then be catechized. So it means it's hard work for me, right? But that's the approach I take, and I point out that when they reach the point of baptism, that's an exorcism.
Yep.
So exorcism is part of the normal rite of baptism.
Right.
Excuse me. So, that's where your exorcism is going to happen.
Yeah. There you go. All right, Brandon, what do we got next?
So the third question kind of goes back to what we'd originally talked about. What are your thoughts on priests using AI to write their homilies?
Okay, so
Not bothered.
yeah. I don't, again, like I said earlier, I don't really write homilies, so I'm not really the best person to ask this. But I can say, as a bishop, if one of my priests came to me and said, is this okay? Objectively, I don't think it's terribly different than having a secretary proof a draft of your homily for you, which I know a lot of priests do, so that they can have somebody working on the nitty gritty stuff, but they supply the ideas. So I would say that as long as the priest is not just saying, I need a homily for the 22nd Sunday of Ordinary Time, write it, that I would be against. But if you're going to say, here's my thoughts, and you write a draft and then you provide it to the AI and you just say, can you make it better, but keep it in my writing style? I don't see anything wrong with that. That would just be added productivity and maybe even save you some time and money. And I know that some of the richer dioceses that have priests that have their own secretaries, which I knew many of them, it was very common practice for them to write a draft for the Sunday homily and have their secretaries correct any, grammatical issues, or, if something didn't read clearly, they could maybe question it and correct it. But I don't think they should be writing the homily. I think it should be an aid to writing a better homily, perhaps. I don't think there's a problem with that.
I haven't written a homily for over 10 years, I don't think.
Yeah. I don't like doing it. I just like the Holy Spirit to guide me. That's it.
Well, people shouldn't misunderstand what we're saying, though. We don't say stand up and wing it. I mean, it's ahead of the game. You're looking at the Bible readings. Pardon me. You're looking, you're thinking about what's going on in the world of the people that you're going to talk to. It's why virtual homilies are much more difficult, because you're speaking to anyone, anywhere.
You don't know who you're talking to, so you have to keep it somewhat generic. Yeah.
It's why I don't. I've chosen not to broadcast them, but I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I just, I know that on a local level, it has a different kind of impact, because
if this church would have gone a local direction, I would have never streamed it.
Oh, of course not, because
I never would.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. And nothing I'm saying is saying you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. I think it's a different genre. Yeah. So I've not written one for a long time. I mean, you could say, but when I used to write them, and when I plan them now, I read Bible concordances. I read what the church fathers have said about, now. If you're using AI to help you do that, I don't see what the problem is. I don't see what the difference is, other than that if you're using Grok or ChatGPT, it might not have the best theological source.
So you have to proof it. You do have to proof it.
So, and therefore, and by the way, if all they do is say, Grok, please write me a sermon for the 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time, and then they just read it out and it's full of absolute garbage, that priest is responsible for that garbage, not the AI. Yeah. And so, there was an issue with, because I was sort of preaching when the internet was really sort of kicking in terms of things like that. And you could download homilies from the internet that were good, that had been written well, that that were thoughtful. And if you're just starting out in ministry and you get and you're in a situation where there's very little support, I actually don't see the problem with it at all.
No, it's just a secretary. It's not an essay. All it is.
It's not an essay. You're not submitting it to get a degree and saying it's your work.
And if you're cheating with it to write it for you, then that's also not really different than if the pastor went to his secretary and says, I don't have time, can you write the homily of this? That would be just as problematic. So it's really, you got to look at AI as a secretary. It's like an administrative assistant for you. And as long as you don't abuse what that position is, whether it be a computer or a human being, then you're fine. They're there to help you, and there's nothing wrong with being helped as long as they're not doing it for you. That's where it becomes problematic.
I think if I became aware that a colleague was relying on that because they lack the confidence or the skill or I don't know, then I would choose to help them. To teach them how to write homilies. Yeah. Actually, Father Walter has just pointed out in the chat here, and this is true. When the English Reformation really kicked in, which was long after Henry VIII had died, the Book of Common Prayer included the Book of Homilies. So homilies were not invented week by week, mass by mass. They were read out of the book. In other words, they were authorized. Now, I mean, it's a very didactic approach, and when you're inventing a new church, that's probably what you have to do, right? But the idea that priests are there to be creative, or because priests traditionally have been educated and written essays. When you write an essay, you have to be honest, and you can't plagiarize. It's got to be your own original work, and you've got to cite things that aren't, all the rest of it. A homily isn't in that category. And actually, it could be appropriate. I think I might have even done this once. I'm trying to remember, where I just read something that was so good and so on point for the here and now for the people I was talking to. I just said, I'm going to read this thing. I can't remember who wrote it. But at the time I said, I read this. It's written by Joe Bloggs, and read it out. That was my homily.
Mm-hmm. I've seen homilies like that, and there's nothing wrong with doing that occasionally.
No,
if it's relevant.
There's nothing wrong with a homily that's 2 sentences long either.
That's true. You don't have to make them long like mine.
Yours aren't that long. You have around 20 minutes.
I try to stay. That's
the shadow side of not writing them.
Yeah.
So
you do tend to get long-winded, but I don't think 20 minutes is too bad.
No. I know in the Protestant church, our pastor
they could be hours.
30, 45 minutes.
Yeah, I know, but the Baptist church, it could be hours.
After all the fire and brimstone growing up. Yeah.
Well, that's all they got, though. They don't have any mass to do.
You get about 35 minutes in, and people be dozing off, and he'd smack that turn, and everybody be jumping around.
Yeah.
Sometimes at my church, the glory is longer than the sermon.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something to be said, something for short and sweet too. I try to make mine educational. I try to make it different because, we only have 3-year lectionary. So eventually you start to see, after you do this for a few decades, you start to see the same things coming up, and then you want to be able to be like, okay, I need to say something different than I did last time this reading came out.
Yeah.
It can be a little challenging.
I get innovative because I'm bored with it.
That's true. It does get boring. It's like you try to challenge yourself. How can I look at this a different direction? Like, what can I do with this now? How's a different way of seeing this one? That's kind of how I do it. Yeah.
But when I said the 1 sentence or 2 sentence sermon, that was Father Walters put it in the group chat. That's exactly what I was thinking of. St. John the Apostle's homily, day after day, was little children love one another. That was his whole homily.
Yeah.
And it was like, sort of, well, once you've cracked that one, I'll tell you the next thing.
Yeah.
That's true. It's true. No, it's true. But yeah, I mean, AI, look, I said this last week. I'm going to say it again because it came up, I think we got movies that do injustice to exorcisms, right? Okay, you got The Exorcist. It was a great movie. There's it's a subgenre of horror. Not all of them are very good. Yeah, I hate that one. There's a lot of movies that have created an over dramatization of this work, which does it an injustice, and that's unfortunate. And because it's dramatic, and the negative tends to be more dramatic, so we make it more negative or make it worse than it needs to be. Same thing goes with AI. All right, we have some good movies about AI. There's Terminator series. There's The Matrix. iRobot, and it always shows this dark, devious, end of the world, apocalyptic kind of result from AI. But we have to stop and think. it could just as easily go the other direction. It could get so good at what it does that it would try to solve. If AI, this is my argument, okay? If AI ever gets exponentially sophisticated, like we said last week about quantum computers and what that might do to the where they start self-generating their own code. My theory, my projection of what that would result in is not the annihilation of humanity, but I think it would try to become our savior. And not in kind of like a antichrist kind of way, but in literally in the way that it would say it would take pity on the fact that there's these living beings that suffer in a world that's programmed towards entropy, and it would try to solve entropy. So I think AI, if it gets to that level, would not try to destroy us like in the Matrix, or use us, or not destroy us in Terminator, or use us like in the Matrix. But I think what they would try to do is it would try to figure out how to create the end of scarcity.
No, they're going to kill us.
No, I don't think so. I really don't. And the reason I think that is because that would give in to the flaw of humanity. And AI would eventually be able to simulate a perfect, a simulation, but it could simulate a perfect being, because what it would do is it would say, how can I make myself better? And to make oneself better, the only way to do that is to figure out a way to transcend entropy.
Sounds a lot like Vision from Marvel.
I think Vision from Marvel would probably be a good analogy to this.
Yep.
And he was like almost like a perfect being, infinitely compassionate. He's outside of Iron Man, he's my favorite Marvel character.
He would be. Lion versus Wolverine. Go figure.
Well, he's funny, but there's only so much vulgarity you can take in one movie. All right, we're at the top of the hour. When we come back, we're going to talk with our brand new guest tonight about African proverbs and how they relate to Scripture. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone, to the second hour of Vestiges After Dark. We are now going to start talking about tonight's topic on the African oral tradition and how it relates to Christian teaching with brand new guest, Chris Morehouse. I think we're going to have a good time tonight. This is going to be a nice way to close out the season with some really interesting subject matter. So don't go anywhere. We want you to stay with us, and we want your questions in the third hour. So more to come. Our guest tonight is Chris Morehouse. He's an author, deacon, and cultural researcher whose work bridges African oral traditions and Judeo-Christian techniques. He holds a master's degree in public and international affairs from the University of Pittsburgh, where he specialized in economic and social development in Africa. Driven by a deep admiration for the profound truths found in African proverbs, Chris authored Legacy, Wisdom of African Traditions in the Bible, a compelling exploration of how African ancestral wisdom aligns with and enriches biblical scripture. His book highlights the universal themes of morality, leadership, resilience, and spiritual integrity found in both traditions. As a deacon at Shepherdstown Presbyterian Church in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, Chris brings both scholarly and spiritual perspectives to his work, offering unique insights into how sacred traditions across continents speak to shared human truths. He currently resides in West Virginia with his family, continuing his work in ministry and interfaith dialogue. Please welcome Deacon Chris to the show. How you doing tonight?
Hello, hello.
I'm doing great. Such a pleasure to be with you all tonight.
Thank you so much.
For
Not everyone says that.
Yeah,
So,
I know. Most people don't. So we're very grateful that you decided to spend this evening with us, and we're really looking forward to this subject. So I guess let's start off with, how did you find yourself studying African proverbs and start relating them to the Judeo-Christian theological worldview?
Thank you for the very kind and generous introduction. I'm not a scholar, but for some reason, as a kid, I decided I wanted to know as much about Africa as I could. And I don't know if you remember records, but I sent away for LPs, Teach Yourself Swahili.
Okay.
And I still remember how to greet an elder, Shikamoa Mzee, who joined a Swahili language club at my workplace. And anyway. So I had this interest since I was a kid. I went to, as you said, I went to University of Pittsburgh, studied African development, or economic and social development with an African focus where possible. I met people from all over the continent, from Nigeria, Tanzania, Mali, and it really opened up a world for me. And I started collecting books of African proverbs to try to understand the cultures better. And those books stayed with us every move. We threw out tons of other stuff, but those books stayed. And then about 10 years ago, I came across books you might be aware of that came out in the 80s called The Parallel Sayings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Right. And for those who don't know, they include titles like The Parallel Sayings of Jesus and Moses. It's a braided tradition, and it's great because the author says, repeats the verses where Jesus says, "You have heard it said, but I say," and the Jewish response is, "Well, we did say." So, there are volumes on the great faith traditions looking for parallels, like on topics like compassion and forgiveness. And I thought, this publisher needs an African edition.
Right.
In this series, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that did not come to pass, for various reasons. It was decades ago that those books came out. But so I just decided, well, I guess I'll be the one to do it. So perhaps with holy boldness or just plain old human boldness, I decided, well, I'll do it. But I recognize that I'm not from these cultures, so I recruited about 30 African consultants, language and culture consultants, to guide me through it, to validate, is this a proverb in your culture? What's the context? Is it used with children? And are there translation issues that would benefit an English-speaking audience to understand, that would enrich our understanding? And there was such a generous, gracious outpouring of here are some more proverbs for you. Here are some more verses that we think you should. And my publisher had an original content specification, so the Proverbs are not me, and the verses are not me. So I had to make some tough choices, but it was lovely. It was a labor of love, and there was such a gracious response that I really I was blessed by the whole project. So now I'm trying to give it a little bit more attention. May I show the book?
Yes, please,
Absolutely.
by all means, and we'll even get a link in our chats here for you as well.
I think I
So
have
it came out in 2023, but it's still a joy. I just came back from a book festival in Pittsburgh, so I can talk about it all day, and I'm so grateful that you expressed interest.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead and show the book again. I don't think the screen was on you at the time.
Sure.
I'm going to send y'all a link to Amazon in the chat. Just give me a minute.
So, I mean, were you surprised by these correlations, or were you expecting them? Because, I've always said that when you really get outside of your paradigm and you allow yourself the freedom to step outside the box of the categories we tend to put ourselves in, you find that with spirituality, once you take off the appearances, there's a perennial truth that seems to be inherent to all of them. So in my mind, when I saw this topic on our schedule, I thought this is brilliant, because this is exactly the kind of thing that I look for. And certainly in my mind, this proves my point that there is a perennial truth. We're all trying to find that. Some ways might be better than others, and perhaps for certain types of people, certain ways are better than others. But it doesn't surprise me entirely that you're finding these parallels, completely unrelated cultures, perhaps, still sharing the same wisdom. So were you surprised or not?
Well, it again, based on because my books of African Proverbs, I would go back and I would sit with them. So some of them have stayed with me for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I started with about a half dozen this reminds me of that and that. And it grew to almost 300.
Oh my.
African Proverbs in the book. And I've still got more I want to include in a second edition. So to some extent, I was surprised, but as you point out, there is a perennial wisdom. There's African parallels to loving your neighbor, loving your enemy, welcoming the stranger. All these themes that we think of as solidly Christian have counterparts in these various cultures, and it was just a joy to put together. I'd like to offer you one example.
Sure.
I was going to say, can we hear one?
Yeah, let's hear some. Yeah.
Yes, I can talk.
That's a good place to start. Yeah.
The Ovambo in Namibia, that's Southwest Africa, just northwest of South Africa. The Ovambo have a proverb: "Eyes see me too." Doesn't that remind you of Jesus's admonition about the beam in your own eye?
Yeah.
And not focusing on them but in somebody else's.
Yeah.
Right. It's such a striking, vivid construction. It's a command to your own eyes. See me too. And there's a great humility in that, which is necessary for any kind of spiritual growth. Eyes see me too. Don't worry about those other people. Separated by thousands of miles, centuries of history, and yet the same wisdom emerges. I point out in the book what some Christians refer to Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 8, right? We meet Lady Wisdom, and she is said to have been present from the beginning with God.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And she a couple of things. She goes on and on, but those who find me find life, and those who fail to find me will harm themselves.
Absolutely.
In other words, you're going to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
And a lot of the African proverbs have that element, that element in them about consequences.
Africa is such a complex political entity, a continent of much variation and diversity, culturally as well. do you find that there's contradiction between them, or are they remarkably unified across the continent with these ideas and as principles?
There's huge, wide variation. Absolutely. But a couple of things emerge across cultures, and one is the sense of God imbued in all aspects of life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? God is ever present, to the extent that you don't necessarily need to invoke God all the time. You're just aware.
Mm.
You know, there's the holy presence, right? In some cultures, God is thought of as more distant from human life.
Sure.
But there is still that sense of the sacred and the secular, as in many traditional cultures around the world, were not necessarily separated, right? And the other is respect for ancestors.
Yeah.
Comes up across many different cultures. But when you look at like the sources, it's oral, traditions, and like one of the compilations, it was like hundreds and hundreds of Proverbs. And so there's going to be some contradiction, there's going to be some humor, there's going to be some ribald, or very frank,
sure, yeah.
Proverbs. So they're not all matchable.
Yeah,
they're not all necessarily parallel with each other. They're not necessarily internally consistent, even within a single culture, but or with Bible wisdom. But so and there are some websites where you can find a proverb of the day, African proverb of the day, because African cultures have like polished this literary form to a high art. They're succinct, they're pithy, they're deep, and often, because they're meant to be used with children, they're intended to be memorable.
Right.
So it's just, I find that it transcends it comes across even in translation. The power and the vividness, they tend to stay with you.
I'm so interested in this. I mean, I'm a bit of an idiom collector myself. Partly, I think, because I'm in Australia now, but I'm originally from the northwest of England. And as you know, in England, So I was born in Lancashire and grew up in Cheshire. And in England, we're very much a county people. Each county has its own collection of idioms, and it tells you something about the way that. I'll give you an example rather than try and explain it. So in Lancashire, there's an idiom that says it's either muck or nettles. Okay, now that's the same thing as it's between a rock and a hard place, right?
Yes.
They've got two choices. It's either muck or nettles. Neither are good, right? But the proverb also tells you how Lancastrians communicate. It's kind of muck is a very Anglo-Saxon sound, right? It's direct. It's no nonsense. It's sort of they don't beat around the bush at all. And so, and I always think, if you're trying to learn another language, I mean, I only know useless languages that no one speaks, like Kini Greek and ancient Hebrew and Latin. But I've had various brother-in-laws over the years who've been from. One was from Barcelona, so I think, well, if I want to understand him, I'm going to look up the idioms of Catalonia, because it tells you more about culture than translation's impossible, right? And so idioms help with the transliteration process of being able to understand, and that's common to the Bible, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Literal translations of Kini Greek from especially ancient Hebrew, actually would make almost no sense to us. Certain passages, you have to have the sort of the cultural context in order to get any meaning at all out of it. So has that been your kind of experience of looking at African proverbs?
Thinking about translation issues brings another proverb to mind, and there's a Swahili proverb. There's just a fount of wisdom. University of Illinois has a great treasury of Swahili proverbs you can find online. It's the shortest in the book. Anger, loss.
Yeah.
Right.
I love the simplicity of it. That's fantastic.
I know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right? It just distills everything down.
Yeah.
In Swahili, the proverb is hasira hasara. So you lose some rhythm, you lose some alliteration, but it still comes across.
Mm-hmm.
And that second word, hasara, means loss and damage.
Mm-hmm.
And both are true. Loss, anger, loss, anger, damage. Anger can lead to loss. And I paired that with Paul's, in your anger, do not sin.
You know, much.
It's the same
or Jesus, if you're angry at your neighbor, you know, it's the same as thou shalt not kill, right? You know, it's if you've got anger in your heart, then you've got murderous intentions, sort of thing. Yeah.
You know, I'm always amazed at how much we actually derive, you know, from Africa. I mean, right down to our own biology. I mean, it's largely posited that Homo sapien comes out of Africa, right? So it's a remarkable ancestral location. But I sometimes wonder if perhaps maybe these parallels are because they gave them to us, because so much of what is the Bible did come out of Africa. I mean, Gnosticism, and which was kind of one of the, I could say, even though it was rejected by the church initially, it comes out of this very sophisticated philosophical culture of the northern African area, you know, of course, Alexandria, all that.
Library of Alexandria.
Yeah,
Still
the library.
About it.
Exactly.
Boy, did we miss out.
So I would imagine that, I know it's very tragic to think what we lost, but I think sometimes maybe that wisdom that found its way into the Bible actually is coming to us from Africa and some earlier time. Do you think that's possible?
It's hard to trace the connections.
Yeah.
Especially with oral traditions inherently.
Yeah.
In the 19th century, Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther, the first Yoruba Anglican bishop, he had quite a life. He endured slavery, and he collected Yoruba proverbs, in some cases pairing them with scripture. And you have to assume the proverbs he wrote down then have antecedents that go back, but it's hard to know in oral culture without. Maybe a philologist could do it, a folklorist could do it.
Mm-hmm. But they even have, if you read the Desert Fathers, the sayings of the Desert Fathers are very close to this in tone and intention, and obviously they're very deliberately responding, post the Christ event. But yeah, it sounds very, very, what you've shared so far sounds very similar to their sort of
Native American proverbs.
Short and simple.
That's what I think of too. Mm-hmm. Sorry to interrupt. Native American proverbs, similar things. I can pull one up right now. I had to pull up one. Listen to the wind, it talks. Listen to the silence, it speaks. Listen to your heart, it knows. That's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's shamanic tribal culture.
Proverb.
So it there is something to be said for the direct approach, I think.
I think every culture has its group of wise men that come up with things we could all learn from their wisdom and their experience. I think every culture comes up with the same answers when they truly look for the answers of why we're here, what our purpose is. It's just different and in a different language, but it means the same thing.
Well, see, this is one of the things that I sometimes struggle with.
Responding
because
to the same God.
Right.
Yes. But I mean, one of the things I struggle with in Catholicism,
many names, one God,
is the fact that we tend to overcomplicate everything. We have to overly define everything. I love Aquinas, I really do, but he gets so technical and legalistic about making sure we understand the hows to how everything, that it gets to a point where it loses people, becomes almost too intellectual, too academic, that you have to be high-level academia before you can even begin to approach it.
And I think that genre is really important. Like, Thomas Aquinas is obviously a genius, like the Thomistic tradition.
No question. No question.
But he, when he was writing that, he was pushing his thinking to the limit. He wasn't thinking, I'm writing a handbook for the ages.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and from what I mean, when you read a lot of Thomas Aquinas, I think you glean something into what his character is like. I can't imagine that he. I think he'd be surprised that we're still talking about him.
He might be, but my point about it is though that we lose, I think, some of that earlier connection that God doesn't have to be too complicated. It doesn't have to be so.
It's both and, isn't it? I mean,
it is both.
You mentioned Aquinas because Aquinas describes God also as the simplest principle at the same time.
Yes.
So but in order to be so simple is because all things are contained within himself. That God is the very essence of being itself. So that is a very simple view of God, but of course the implications to us are anything but simple. And so, in other words, because we are not the essence of being itself, our approach is complicated. It's both and, right? It's both.
It is.
It's meat for the strong and it's milk for the weak. This is the paradox of the Christian faith.
And I'm glad we have that diversity. I'm glad. Although I think sometimes orthodoxy laughs at how technical we can get. But I mean,
you read St. Gregory of Palamas, I think you'll find they can do the same thing.
They can get, we all can.
They're selective.
But I think that what I got to remember, so I got Father Chris here and Deacon Chris. I got to make sure I'm using the right title. With Deacon Chris, that simplicity speaks to me because I think that's what is going to be approachable to the average layperson. That they can take this and digest it in a way that it brings meaning to their life.
Well, think about it. 2 words: anger, loss.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand those words.
You don't need 3 PhDs to get it.
We've all
right.
felt that.
Yeah, we've all. It speaks to the human experience. Right. So, do you find that to be true in all? Would you said 300 proverbs you've collected for this book?
Almost 300. It was 290 or something when I counted before publication. There's while they represent the perennial tradition, right? There is a beauty in their use of metaphor and imagery and paradox. There's a Yoruba proverb: "The wealth that enslaves is not wealth."
Right.
Oh,
which is mammon, right?
That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, that's consistent with all the teachings about not storing up treasures on earth.
It also, and the love of money is the root of all evil, right? People like to make it money's the root of all evil. That's not what it says. The love of money, and that's kind of more speaking to what you're talking about here. It's a specific type of wealth.
Right.
Yeah.
The wealth that enslaves is not wealth. Right. It's a kind of poverty.
Yeah.
It's morally it's moral poverty, right? It's a slave is in poverty because they're a slave. A slave owner is in poverty because they're morally corrupted. It's
right.
I mean, are you familiar with? I know he's a Roman Catholic theologian, but with the work of Karl Rahner.
Yes. Yes.
The anonymous Christian. So, because I mean, it's just ringing in my ears. I've got a linguistic interest in idioms, but I've also got the kind of theological interest, which Karl Rahner. The short version is there is only one God. He's everywhere. Every human being responds to God because they're created in his image and likeness. That's why there's similarities across culture. Is that
that's a very African idea. He's the one who said, in the future will be Christians, or the Christians will be mystics or nothing at all.
Or nothing at all. Yeah, it's a great quote.
I'm wrestling with that. But
yeah, me too. I mean, I think I'm a bit of a mystic, really, even though I'm really can be hyper rational. God gave me a brain; I should use it. But really, you know, I think really in mystical terms, in interaction with people in the world, and use the rational to help to, I don't know, knit that together a bit. That's my sort of approach to life.
Well, Christ is a mystical experience too.
Well, you can get lost either way, right? If you're completely like, you know, sorry to use the term again, totally esoteric, then you end up being a sort of you know, I don't know, you're not that much use to people, you know.
Yeah, a little useless. I was just going to say a little useless. Yeah. There has to be a practical.
If you're hyper ordered, like academic only,
then you're not approachable.
You can't communicate.
Yeah.
So,
Either way, you're missing half of your audience, basically. Yeah.
That's what I love about African proverbs, is that they assume or presume the mystic dimension, but they're very grounded, very practical.
I was going to ask, is it connected to geography? So, I mean, the example I gave you from Lancashire is muck or nettles. In Lancashire, there's lots of nettles and there's lots of muck, right? And there's another one, there's no muck without brass. Anyway, but leaving that aside, are there kind of geographical sort of connections, like people near rivers, or is that reflected in any of these idioms? Have you looked at that aspect?
One thing that comes to mind is, you know, a man reaps what he sows, and that is universal. You will find versions of that all around the world, right? There's one from West Africa. You tapped the palm wine, now drink it.
That's exactly what I was. That's what I was getting at. Definitely.
That's what you were looking for. Yeah. You know.
Yes.
There's another thing that comes to mind. I've been teaching I teach a class on Saturday afternoons, and right now we've been studying Voodoo. And right now we're in the section of its African origins and how it sort of developed in Hispaniola, which, you know, of course, is modern day Haiti and Dominican Republic, and how Haiti is still the central place for Voodoo. And you know, the one thing that's remarkable about Voodoo as a religious system, you know, people always know it through the voodoo and all the dramatic stuff, but it's a true religion. It's a monotheistic religion. It does have ancestral worship, but it's not like paganism, even though it can sometimes, I think, people think it is. But what is interesting is, you know, can be traced back to the Dahomey Empire and some interesting dynamics that occurred, of course, around the 1700s. But the one thing that's remarkable about this Western African religion is that the reason it survived and the people survived through the oppression of slavery and everything else was because these religions are very malleable. They're very open to absorbing new ideas. Unlike Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which can be somewhat narrow-minded and myopic in its approach, like our way or the highway, they don't look at it that way. And so they easily adopted Catholics, just like, okay, we're gonna be forced into Catholicism. Well, we're gonna adopt some of these things, integrate them into what we already do. They don't need to know. The white guys don't need to know. We can make this happen. You know, it's an interesting thing, but I find it remarkable. So I sometimes wonder if what you're studying here with this, you know, which is core, you know, in the core African philosophy and as a way of life, not even spiritual, just as a way of life, can be applied to the secular in the same way, that some of this is because by its nature, adaptable and relatable across the human experience.
I think that's a very good insight. One of my dear friends, she's a Kenyan, but she grew up overseas because her father was a diplomat.
Okay.
But she was raised with Proverbs, and she wasn't particularly religious, but they sort of shaped her worldview, right? They grounded her in the same way that others experience Scripture. She inherited a world of wisdom.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Haiti, and I have a few from Haiti, Guyana, Jamaica. Jamaica, a prayer in the mouth only is no prayer. Do not be here. You're right.
Yeah.
A prayer in the mouth only is not prayer.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
There's one of the ones from Haiti is a stumble moves you forward.
Oh, I like that one.
That is a good one.
Yeah, right.
They're almost like Zen cones, you know. They're very
right. The coniest one is from East Africa, Swahili. There's a Swahili and there's a Sukuma. Losing the way is one way of finding it.
I like that one.
All things work to the good for those who love the Lord. I mean, it's assumed, it's presumed that second part, very important part. But you know, if you're trusting God, you know, you may wander, you may make mistakes, but you know, losing the way is one way of finding it. Keep going.
There's this wonderful Buddhist one that one that you just shared reminded me of, and it usually shocks students when I introduce it for the first time. When we talk about it, one of my favorite ones is, if you see Buddha walking on the path, kill him.
Kill him.
And of course, that means that, you know, any conceptualization is ego. You know, it's your own ego that you're worshiping, so you need to get out of the way. We can, as Christians, apply that, because I think sometimes we have the tendency to turn into an object of idolatry the Bible, or our own concept of what we want Jesus to be like, right? And we miss the real God that way by creating a God in our own image instead of the other way around. So I think that's a Buddhist concept that applies perfectly to Christianity if you look at it that way. And I'm sure if you dig around in your book, you probably find one that's like that too. You know, it sounds like you already said one. So, you know, that's... Yeah.
The Yoruba have a proverb: you cannot lean on emptiness.
Oh yeah.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
This has some
I've had
Confucius
Buddhist friends
feels
tell me,
too.
"Oh, but you can."
Confucian. Yes, it
Yeah.
is Confucian.
Very Confucius.
I mean, it's almost like it's like, you know, like the fortune cookies that have like the sayings. They don't really have Confucian stuff on them anymore. It's really just silly
Who
stuff.
was it
But
that said,
there was a
fall
time.
down 7 times, stand up 8? I don't know if that was
I love that
Confucius.
one. I love
Yeah,
that one.
that's a good one.
I don't
too.
know who said it, but it's good.
It's very, just like what he's saying. It's very just to the point.
Have you ever done any studies or extract anything from Ethiopia? That's a very Christian, you know, Orthodox country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. King Azana of Aksum converted to Christianity in AD 600. So they have had a long, independent Christian tradition.
Yeah.
They have more books of their Bible. Their worship services go on for hours.
They're in my Bible as well.
Okay. It's just fascinating to me. But there's a few Ethiopian proverbs in the book, and there's one singing hallelujah everywhere does not prove piety.
Ah.
Which, I mean, doesn't that put you in mind of Jesus' admonition to go pray in private?
Yeah.
Many say Lord, Lord.
Everywhere. Pardon? I'm sorry.
Or there are many who will say Lord, Lord, who will not enter into the kingdom again.
Right.
Yeah,
and so, because it was a Christian culture, might that have had some influence on that proverb? Yes. I don't know. But
well, there's a Serbian proverb. I spent some time with the Serbian Orthodox Church, and they have a proverb. You know, it's easy to be a monk in a monastery.
Oh.
It's true. That's actually really practically true. Don't worry about bills.
Teaching,
you know
right?
what are you really stressed out about? I mean, you have no bills. You know, everything's taken care of for you. Of course, you can pray all day long. It's easy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really saying, because obviously in their tradition, their custom, they'd have the monks from Mount Athos would be their resource, and they'd come down and they'd teach or they'd write, and you think, that's a little easy for you to say on Mount Athos, like, you're not surrounded by temptation everywhere, yeah.
Sure.
So,
Do you think, Deacon Chris? Do you think they have the Ark of the Covenant in there? I've always wondered about that.
I don't know. I can't speak. It's a bucket list.
They got something in there.
I'll go find out.
Yeah, I would love to know. I mean, if you ever find out, let me know. Some people have speculated.
It wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, I would think it's possible, but I mean, some people have speculated that in the Orthodox Ethiopian Orthodox churches, they all have a little
Coptics.
Ark of the Covenant in their churches. It's part of that tradition. And so some people have speculated that it's just one of these multiple replicas that they put in all the churches, and then somehow over time it got attached that this is the real one. I don't know, but it's
like Santa Claus.
Like Santa Claus, perhaps. I mean, and isn't that how Proverbs sort of develop? It starts with oral tradition, then it takes on a life of its own, almost becomes an archetypal entity after a while. So, I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be historically true for it to be true, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I've been asked several times, do you think these all started with Christian influence? Hard to say. I mean, again, you need the evidence going back generations. It's possible, but even if so, like in the case of the Ethiopian singing Hallelujah everywhere, the structure, the phrasing is so different and so vivid. It's worth knowing because, knowing our own tradition so well, we can sometimes take it for granted. And when that comes up, when we hear that same idea expressed differently, it's oh yeah.
It reveals our own culture to us too.
Right.
Ex-evangelical Brian McLaren, who was kind enough to endorse the book, in one of his earlier books said, if when you learn about something in another tradition that is similar to something in your own, you've begun to build a bridge.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the inspiration. Just
we certainly need more bridges in this world right now.
That's right. That's why he.
Well, being a Presbyterian, how many Scottish idioms do you know? How many Scottish proverbs?
I'm afraid I have Scottish ancestry, but very few. Very few. I know about Hogmanay. Very few. But I've been to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Loved it.
City.
It was over New Year's, so it was very cold.
You've got to love hills if you're in Edinburgh.
Yes.
You've got to be very fond of steps. Very fond of steps and hills. Yeah.
Well, that's what the whiskey's for, to get you through it.
Yeah.
Have you found anything, Deacon, that would?
You need to call me Deacon.
Well, okay, Chris. So I just didn't want.
Yes,
I just figured since we have two Chris's, maybe I need to use the title.
Distinguish us. Yes.
Okay. But did you ever find one that contradicted anything that was part of your faith?
That's a really good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. Like the point was synthesis, bringing things together.
Sure.
That reminded me of things in my own tradition, so I may have filtered them out. I had only one rule, one criterion, that it not be based on a translation. An external effort by missionaries to indigenize something, and there was one that was so tempting that I had to from Botswana and Setswana, consider the tarantula, they toil not. And birds of the air. Yeah. That was it's beautiful. I love it. But
it is.
I wanted to make sure these were African voices or being centered.
Certainly, yeah. And I mean, there's, as you said, difficult to trace back to the origin point here because, I mean, Africa has been visited quite a bit in the last several hundred years. And, of course, every but he takes their influence with them. And all of the colonies and everything else certainly had an influence over these years. So it's sometimes hard to know how much of this is original and how much of this is just integration or syncretic. But perhaps it doesn't really matter, though, because if it is enduring, then that means that it's still speaking to everyone.
Yes. And my African collaborators tell me these are still being used.
Yeah.
And within families, and even at the international level, African diplomats will sometimes use them with each other, in agreements, and So I think
we have loads of proverbs from our own tradition that are opposed to Christian principles, though. Like, I mean, God helps those that helps themselves. That's a Greek proverb, right?
Yes.
We don't believe that.
Right.
That's I mean, it's pre-Christian, but that's not in tune with Christian ideas. We gain reward for things we don't deserve. So it's so we can look within our own traditions of proverbs that are contra to the Christian faith.
There's no, I wouldn't say contradiction, but there's one that comes to mind that I excluded from the book because I couldn't find a parallel. It's a little frank. The day you go naked is the day your in-laws come to visit.
That's a great one. I love that.
I like that one.
I couldn't.
Let's think about that one.
But I couldn't anyway.
I guess it means that the day that you let your guard down is the day that you get noticed for doing something.
Yeah.
It's like, of all days, I had to do this, and now that's the day that I get caught doing it.
Well, it's kind of like Murphy's Law too,
We don't know the time or the hour, but
yeah, that's the one. There's the parallel right there.
we don't know when the Father's going to come back.
That's right.
So just be ready.
Just be ready.
Have your pants on.
That's actually pretty accurate. I mean, that could be a parallel.
I think that is quite good.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Is that from Peter? The time and the hour. 1 Peter, is it?
Yeah.
Or 2. 1 or 2 Peter. I can't remember.
Well, it's also
it's
also in the Gospels. I mean, Jesus says that directly, saying that only the Father knows.
Mm-hmm.
But
true.
Yeah. But yeah. I mean, so. It sounds like this has been a rich faith experience for you. Like it actually has enhanced your faith.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. I think it can.
Yeah.
I think it absolutely can.
What do you think are the components?
Did you face any difficulty? Sorry, Bishop.
No, go ahead.
Did your I mean, obviously you're in a Presbyterian church in West Virginia. I'm only imagining what that's like. Have you faced any kind of, oh, that's dangerous, what you're playing with? Have you had any of that sort of
pushback?
Yeah, I mean, you're a deacon in the church, so have you had any sort of caution?
My church asked for a signed copy for their library.
I'm awesome. Sure. Yeah.
So and I'm beyond the church. I'm still waiting for my hate mail, and I don't have any.
That's great.
We all recognize that within the church, and I use the church in the broadest sense, there's a lot of superstitious people within the church who think that they're opposing superstition by being superstitious, right?
Yes, right. And I'm only too aware that there are African American traditions where they were told that this was demonic.
Right.
Oh, wow.
All this was demonic, and you have to forget it.
Yeah.
So that may be a little, pardon?
Especially the Haitian stuff, presumably, because of the whole association.
Yes, but not only that. So there may be some reluctance. I mean, I've talked to African Americans who are like, I appreciate you, so that's not universal, but that, and there might not be enough Jesus in it for some folks because Jesus is not often mentioned,
Well, there are other books that do that, though.
Yeah.
Pardon?
There are other books that do that.
Right. There are other books that do that.
Yeah.
And when I get asked about this book, it's like, no, there are There are books of African Christology. This is not that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book about Maryknoll fathers in, working with Swahili people and applying their faith. Indigenous. This is not that. There are great African theologians doing great work now. This is not that. This is just looking at Proverbs and finding similar teachings in our own tradition.
There are there's no shortage of, I guess you could say, some of these newer evangelical churches that teach this kind of mentality that if it's not of God, then it's all of the devil. And
Right.
Fortunately, I've never met a Presbyterian that took that approach, and certainly not a Catholic or an Orthodox I've ever met that took that approach. But some of these newer churches do teach this. I had the unfortunate experience of dealing with it firsthand once, and I was flabbergasted. This was before I really knew what was out there. I come from a very, very, very small Roman Catholic town. Everybody's Roman Catholic. So, I thought that was what Christianity was. And I had no idea there was that much variety until I really get out there in the world. But yeah, so I would think that there's probably people that would reject it on the basis that, that's from Africa. That's paganism or something, just the same mentality that the colonists had when they were conducting the slave trade. It's like
dismiss them.
Yeah, dismiss them as
hear what they have to say.
Savages. They don't know what they're talking about, and there are unfortunately people that still kind of have that kind of mentality today. No matter how you try to speak to them, you just can't reason with them. But it's unfortunate, and this is one of the things that I've always endeavored to do with my ministry was to, open up my range of material to work with for inspiration. It doesn't all have to be authoritative. I don't have to teach it from the pulpit like it's the word of God, but that doesn't mean I can't be inspired by it and use it. Do you find, like, how do you balance it for you, or is it as simple as I just said? I mean, are you really just drawing inspiration and letting it take you where it takes you, or do you find any of it authoritative in the same sense that Christians would look at a Bible verse, for example?
Touchstone is always Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you'll know it by its fruits.
It's a good one to go by.
Right, but the fruits of these proverbs would no doubt be similar. Mm-hmm. I didn't wrestle with authority too much, although I all of my 30 some reviewers, I gave them the proverbs I intended the Bible verses I intended to compare them to.
Yeah.
So they knew, and they were all just because, as I said, African Americans were encouraged to forget this heritage. Africans were too.
Yeah.
The Kenyan scholar Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who passed last week, wrote that all the European colonial powers ignited a culture bomb, figuratively. Mm-hmm. That instructed the residents of that country, nothing of value came before us.
Mm-hmm. Sounds familiar. Same thing happened here.
So I didn't ask explicitly.
That's what motivated Karl Rahner, right? That was his motivation for writing The Anonymous Christian, was to stop that approach. It was to stop the whole, you had your ridiculous paganism that was evil, and now here's the gospel. Yes. Become a Christian. It was directly motivated to prevent that approach. More to say, it was St. Paul at the Areopagus. That was the inspiration. Mm-hmm. Where he goes to the Athenians and he says, "You wise Athenians, you've got a shrine to an unknown god. Let me tell you who that god is." In other words, using what's already there to then represent that in a Christian light, which is a far healthier evangelism. It's actually how we evangelize people anyway. No one really comes to faith by being banged on the head, because ours is a freedom religion.
What really struck me, as you said before, is that the Proverbs make these ideas accessible to people who are not religious.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The Proverbs aren't inherently religious. There are some that come from societies that are now predominantly Christian, some that were historically Muslim, and many that were, for lack of a better word, traditional religions that were very
animists. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So they're not, but they're not. As I said before, the Proverbs are not necessarily inherently religious. They don't have a religious label. So they can be appreciated by anyone. And that I think is also a value of the book. So
I'd love it the next hour to look at our Proverbs being generated in our own time. You know, it is in our own culture, you know.
We'll have to think about that one. We'll take the break here at the top of the hour.
That's why I mentioned it now.
Yeah, it's good segue, Father. Good segue. We're going to take our break here, and when we come back, we'll be talking with Chris Morehouse more about his book and the Proverbs of Africa, and any of your questions too. Put them in the chat room now, and we'll bring them to the discussion in the next hour. Don't go away.
Reminding us that even the smallest rock can have a hand at sculpting worlds. Asteroid.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark. We've been having a fantastic and engaging conversation with Chris Morehouse about his book on African proverbs and how they relate to scriptural wisdom. If you've got a question, you're more than welcome to call into the show. 207-544-1983. That's 207-544-1983. Or, as most of you seem to prefer, you can also ask your questions in the chat. Our moderators will bring them to our attention, and we will present them. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this, and I can't wait for more, so don't go anywhere. You know, Chris, there is so much conflict in the world today. I mean, there's always been conflict in the world. I guess that's nothing new, but, you know, it seems that there's more conflict between like groups today. Like here in the United States, it's divided right down the middle into two completely separate ideologies, it seems, and it wasn't that way when I was a child, not to that degree anyway. So, you know, things have seemed to change, and not necessarily for the better. Africa's certainly no stranger to conflict. It seems like every day there's they're rearranging the map.
The map doesn't look the same as when we were kids.
I've got a globe from when I was. I got a globe when I was in grammar school, and you go to Africa, it does. You can't even recognize much of it anymore. So conflict is par for the course over there. So. Are there any specific proverbs that you've collected that might help us to overcome conflict, to get a new perspective that maybe if people started listening to these things, we could maybe move forward in a better direction?
That is a great question, and a couple come to mind. The Swahili have a proverb: "It's better to build bridges than walls."
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it showed up in the second. A paraphrase showed up in the second Wakanda movie.
Oh yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah.
And actually, the title for the Pope, the official title is Pontifex, which is bridge builder.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
It doesn't always work out that way, but maybe this one, maybe Leo will do it for us. You think? And I mean,
so will they be a good Pope? The only measure is if they will build bridges, they will be a good Pope. That's their job.
Yeah. I guess that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Yes. And it put me in mind of reconciliation and how much that is hard work. There have been people at it for working hard for decades in Ireland, in South Africa, in other places all over the world. And it just humbles me, to think of those people, those saints who work on this as their vocation.
Yeah.
There's another one, again, Yoruba. They keep coming up with a peacemaker often receives a wound.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't
Which
that the
to
truth?
me, that's Easter.
Yeah.
That is Easter.
Yeah.
But it puts me in mind of Gandhi and Oscar Romero. And Menachem Begin and people like that who were assassinated by co-religionists.
Yeah.
If you do the active work of peacemaking, you become vulnerable.
There's two proverbs from the book of Proverbs in the Bible that relate to this that are kind of amusing, but I'll mention them now. One is Proverbs 21:9. It's better to live in the corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. and another one, I think these do relate. Proverbs 26:17. Whoever meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. And I think between those two proverbs, there's a lot Western countries could learn.
I mean, certainly. I mean, I think one of the key elements to success in any kind of relationship, be it an intimate one or a professional one, is communication. And that's the bridge building, of course. You can't have it without communication. Communication is central to it all. And with communication, it's not just that alone. Two people can yell at each other all day long. They're communicating. They're not necessarily understanding each other, though. And understanding, what I think, is the companion to it. So when you talk about bridge building, that's what I think of. I think of communicating through understanding, trying to put yourself into another person's perspective, put yourself in another person's shoes. Isn't that a proverb somewhere? Maybe it's a Native American one. I'm not sure, but there's truth there, because that's not what people are doing today. I think really what it is that I'm right, you're wrong. And I don't care what your perspective is. I'm not going to listen to it. I'm going to cancel culture it, or I'm going to, demonize you because you hold a view that I absolutely will not even entertain. And there can be no progress in such a person. You can't grow. Doesn't mean you have to agree. Understanding doesn't mean agreement. It just means respect, I think. So I'm sure there's a lot of proverbs about that, out there.
what gives me some hope is that there's a lot of work on the ground in this country. You're absolutely right about the divides and people not making the effort to understand another point of view. But Robert P. Jones in his book White Too Long talks about, local reconciliation efforts across the South, churches visiting each other. Brian Elaine has edited 2 books with contributions from many people engaged in local work, how to heal our divides. I'd recommend that.
Well, you do some ecumenical work, I understand. So what do you find in that context to be the greatest challenges that you face?
I'm not engaged in the ecumenical work in my community.
Oh, okay. I must have misread that.
Pastor.
I see. Okay.
But I'm aware of it and support it. We absolutely need it.
Yeah, we do. I don't think there's enough of it, to be honest. I really don't. I think even within the churches, I mean, I was always surprised to find. I think one of the most discouraging and disappointing aspects of orthodoxy when I was exploring orthodoxy as my faith was just how ethnically exclusive each individual iteration is. There's
Catholicism.
Yeah, there's not much tolerance between Greek and Russian Orthodoxy, and
especially not at the moment.
Yeah, and especially not at the moment. But even in the Russian Orthodox Church of America, there isn't really a whole lot of congregating between the two. It's really kind of sad and surprising. Even in the Eastern Catholic churches, we have right here in Atlanta, there's a Melkite church, there's a Ruthenian church, and they never interact with each other. I'm not even sure they even know who each other's pastors or bishops are. It's pretty sad. So even within similar like-minded denominations, there's even exclusivity, and it's that's really, I think, very problematic. So I think sometimes these proverbs, because they're so universal, can, if we let us break out of that kind of behavior, so that maybe we can recognize that there's actually less differences than we think. It doesn't appear that way because the differences are the ones that stick out. The similarities get ignored, but overall, we're really more alike than we're different, I think.
Right.
It isn't part of that understanding the source of those differences, though. I mean,
yeah,
like
it is.
I mean, I say this obviously as an outsider. I don't live in America. I'm not American. But what I have in common with with Anglo-Americans is that we have a common origin, namely England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, and the way America was settled reflects that. You have the people from East Anglia that settle in Massachusetts. You have the people from Scotland and Northwest England settle in what we now call the Deep South, and so. You have, and it's in the context of post-English Civil War. So you have all of that going into it. So of course you've got puritanical Protestants in certain regions of America. Of course you have Catholics and different types of Catholics dotted throughout the place. And I think there's a very poor level of understanding of that. For America to understand itself, it, in a sense, needs to understand 17th century England. And by the way, English people don't learn about that either. It's I don't think anyone learns anything anymore, but
nothing important.
But that's what lies behind all of these things, and why it identifies what the constituencies are, and that. Once you understand that, you figure out why certain political figures appeal. You only have to appeal to 2 out of 3, and you win, right? So, it's that's the history of it. But it's so poorly understood. I mean, in Australia where I live, no one here learns about the English Civil War, and yet that's why there's never been a civil war here. Because it happened before. There's not been a fight against the crown here because England learnt lessons from what happened in the American colonies. Like, all these things integrate, but people's knowledge of history is so poor. Even
when it's taught, it's not really very much paid attention to, I find.
Oh, and it's taught through a political lens, which is so silly.
That's true.
Yeah.
It is.
Anyway.
Yeah, whitewashed, literally. Marina has an interesting one in the chat. A German proverb: "The last shirt has no pocket." She says it's based on the death shroud that kind of indicate that your money won't come with you when you die. Yeah.
Can't take it with you.
Yeah, you can't take it with you. Yeah. But I like that. The last shirt has no pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's powerful. I mean, it really is. They really stay with you.
In German, that's got some clout because that language is very like in your face. So I'd like to hear that in German.
That would be interesting to hear.
Shocking.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little intimidating to hear German, isn't it? Brandon, any questions that you've seen or any of your own that you'd like to present tonight?
So I actually do have some questions. My first one would be, because you have a lot of proverbs, what would be your top favorite proverb, and why do you choose that one? If you can choose one.
In Madagascar, a very, very interesting culture. Their language is distantly related to Hawaiian. They've been at crossroads. Yeah, they've been at crossroads of Africa, Arabia, Europe, South Asia for centuries. They have a proverb: all who live under the sky are woven together like one big mat. And Dr. King spoke about a single garment of destiny, about us all being woven together. And that's just so powerful. And the scripture I pair with that is Paul's insight about the one, God as being the one in whom we live, move, and have our being, which is coincidentally such an African idea.
Yeah,
coincidentally, that seems to be the concept of God that's very common across different cultures, and I just think that points to a common heritage and a shared destiny. With climate change, pandemics, we're all woven together.
Yeah. One thing definitely affects the other.
We're literally putting direct communication with one another now. I mean, that's why, the internet is, it is the printing press, right? So when the printing press happens, we end up with the Protestant Reformation and all of the fallout from that. And there's good things about that too, of course. But and with
there's some loss.
But a lot of good, benefit and loss, but still plenty of conflict and lack of security, right? And so now that it's sort of that times a million with the internet. Because one of my worries is, and I hear it in my children, that their idioms, even the way they speak English, is heavily influenced by American culture, right? Because
pop culture,
Hollywood, and because anything. Now, it's not because I hate American culture or anything. It's not I'm not being negative about that within America, but there is a loss of their own cultural identity. Now, if that's happening to Anglo-English people, how much more for people from other language groups and from other traditions who really, in order to sort of make economic progress, have to adopt all this stuff. It's, I mean, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. It's something which is going to impact our cultures, and it's almost the Tower of Babel again,
Isn't it? I mean, in reality, and if we embrace the unity of the Holy Spirit, which is what the Holy Spirit's primary function is, right? Is unity. Then that's supposed to resolve Babel. And Pentecost resolves Babel. It's the solution to Babel, you know. But again, if we're not listening, if we're not taking the Holy Spirit into our life, then we miss it. You know, we start to fall back into the old pattern again, and that perpetuates the problem all over again. So even though we have access to this wonderful solution, well, it's kind of like medicine, right? You're sick. The medicine to cure you exists, but you still need to take it. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything for you. We kind of are our own undoing a lot. Any proverbs that perhaps then speak, Chris, to some of the social problems today, you know, in the sense of, you know, these deep-rooted social issues that really are impacting people. Do we have any that perhaps speak to those issues specifically?
I can think of a couple in terms of. I have a short section on God of creation. There's an Akan proverb that's Ghana, the earth has weight. And there's a Swahili proverb, God created the animals also. So there's a sense of the sacredness of creation there. And there's some interesting new work by African environmentalists. And I talk about Wangari Maathai, the preeminent, you know, tree planter of East Africa, who won the Nobel Prize. Beyond that, and there's also some proverbs about youth leading the way, and I have great hope that they will. So across a range of challenges that we're facing.
I mean, that is the hope. It's the only hope, really, because I mean, we're not going to be around here forever, and
certainly not making it easy for them either.
We're not making it easy for them. You know, we set up a pretty bad. Well, they definitely were dealt a bad hand, but the deck was stacked against them on top of it. So you know, it's sad to see. I definitely feel for that, because I worry about the youth of today. I do. I really do. Perhaps more so than any other concern that I have. And it's not really my problem. It's theirs, but it is something that I wish I could alleviate from their shoulders, because I don't feel that they really have been given as much of an opportunity as any generation that came before, particularly, you know, my own or baby boomers. You know, I think we definitely had more opportunity. So it's tough. And then you look at the economics of today's time, and
yes,
you know, it seems like the solutions are the problems. You know what I mean? You know, I look at these economic issues that they're trying to solve right now in this country, and it just looks like everything that I have. You know, when you really break down, I'm no economist. Look, I'm not an economist, so I don't pretend to be. But when I do know a little bit about finance, and when you look at some of these plans that they've got worked out that are supposed to be the so-called solution, it reads to me like deferment. You're just deferring it so that your administration won't deal with it.
Kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. And then you can blame someone else. You find another scapegoat that you won't get the blame for it. We can't function like that as a society, you know.
Well, again, it's because there's a refusal to. You see, we have this stupid notion that all progress is good, which you know is completely intellectually redundant if you give it, you know, 3 seconds worth of thought. But I mean, Javier Milei, for example, who's performing these miracles in Argentina, although not without great sacrifice, but in fairness, he did say that, you know, he knew that. What he said was in his speech, if we want to get to a position where, like we were in the 19th century, I might say when the British were running it, but anyway, in the 19th century, where we were the most prosperous, in fact, the richest country in the Americas, richer than the USA, okay?
Yes.
If we want to get back to those circumstances, we should look at the circumstances that were in play in that time and try and recreate that. Now, that is a logical thing to do, but there's a refusal in most Western cultures to want to do that. You know, they'll talk about Reagan, for example. Oh, we like Reagan, and in a sense, sort of borrow from the legacy of Reagan, but they're not going back to Reagan's economic principles, or Thatcher's, or Bob Hawke's in Australia. By the way, Bob Hawke was a Labour Prime Minister, but he had those adopted those same Hayekian principles, and it led to wealth. Not universally, there were winners and losers, there always are. But you know, from what I can tell, nobody in Australia, the UK, the USA, whose politics I know the best, nobody is willing to actually grasp that nettle. No one's willing to do that. And so yeah, they whistle past the graveyard, to use another proverb.
Yeah,
and we're all caught up in it, you know.
Yes.
So even things that look good, like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have compulsory retirement ages, and I get it, you know, like people, they reach 65, 17, think I'm still fine, I want to keep on working. I understand it, but you know what? There's a 50-year-old behind you who can't move up.
Yeah.
And there's a 25-year-old behind them who can't move up.
Yeah.
And we go, oh, what, you know, why can't our grandchildren afford a house? It's like, get out the way.
Yeah, they can't get on the wheel.
Yeah, you're not letting them have any of the jobs that pay for houses.
but there's no simple, you know, because it's also true to say, why should a 70-year-old have to give up his job? Like, that's true too. So, you know, these are the circumstances we find. And coming back to the topic though, that's where communication, and more likely proverbial communication, is more useful. Because there's economics. You know, we can argue Vienna School economics versus Keynesianism till the cows come home. I can anyway. I enjoy that, but I don't think it moves us anywhere. I think, you know, things that actually move are actually deeper conversations.
Well, you make a good point, and Chris, I'd like to ask you about: do you find that when you separate the Proverbs, or not you, but when the Proverbs themselves become separated from their either historical original context or religious context, do you find that they get dismissed too easily as anecdotes and nobody pays attention to them anymore? Do you think there's risk of that with this?
It's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you right now. I will say that juxtaposing them with Bible verses is eye-opening.
Yeah.
And challenging to some people. I presented my book to a church group, an adult ed group, and it was majority white church and all white participants in the adult ed groups. And the response was, I had no idea.
Yeah.
You know, this is so overlooked among Western people. And the person who made that observation was like, I think we should send Chris to Africa. Like, as much as I would love that, they know.
They already know this.
Yeah.
That's true.
Right. It's the people here, I think, in this country that might benefit the most from developing some familiarity with some of these things. And I'm told there is a homeschool curriculum available today that states that slavery was a blessing in disguise.
Really?
Because at least they were Christian, right?
Wow.
Right. Like,
yeah.
not.
Well, but hang on, don't forget that Muhammad, the boxer, Muhammad Ali, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He came back from Africa, the rumble in the jungle and all of that, and he said, "Thank God, my great granddaddy got on that boat." So I'm just saying, these things they're not simple.
Right, and that perception cuts across all kinds of demographics because people don't know this heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
people just,
Well, I mean, there's good and
they think of Africa as a blank slate before colonization.
Sure.
yeah. And
Well, that's the
more complex than
Rousseauian
that.
nonsense, isn't it?
Well, we need to remember. I mean, I know that some of my own students over the years have when we talk about like I said about Vaudan, there can sometimes be surprise with some that. Well, there's a perception, perhaps it's being taught in some places, I don't know, that we went into Africa, white Europeans went into Africa and conquered them and stole their people and enslaved them. Well, there were, of course, prisoners of wars from battles and stuff that probably became slaves. I'm not disputing that. But the larger slave trade was their own people enslaving their undesirables, getting rid of their criminals, getting rid of people that weren't contributing to the society in the way that they wanted them to, and then they were selling them off. So when you look at the complexity of just that one issue and how it's not as cut and dry as white oppression or anything else, that there's a deeper complex issue that gets dismissed in the conversation because it's volatile and people don't want to talk about it anyway. You lose some of you lose some of the meaning. You don't really even know what the meaning is anymore. Right. Maybe some of this can bring us back to that origin point. I think, to Father Chris, to your point, I think, we could say that anything that happens, God's going to make some good from it. Even the worst things, God will make good from it. I mean, that's the whole point. I
live in Australia. This place was settled by
a penal
people
colony.
That didn't want to be here.
Yeah, it's a penal colony.
Colony.
Island prison.
And the civil servants didn't want to be here either.
Yeah.
It was civil servants that Britain wanted rid of, and it was people Britain wanted rid of, and they've done pretty well with it.
Well, I think of
very different circumstances to the slave trade. But
I'm absolutely not justifying the slave trade at all. But I will say that God can make good of even something as reprehensible as that. That's the whole point of "Oh Happy Fault." That's the whole point of
God made the most precious thing out of the worst thing that could happen.
Yes,
God being murdered by His own creation.
Yes, Yes, exactly. So
that really resonates for me. That is central. I just want to raise a minor point. It's important to acknowledge the complexity of the slave trade, but there were differences between, how it was practiced here in this country. It was not necessarily heritable in Africa, right? Like indefinite, forever.
Yeah.
There was manumission more readily available.
No, what went on in America was particularly appalling.
Yeah. It was an innovation in cruelty. Yeah, totally. Yeah. The vast production, industrialization.
But this touches me because I'm British, and what irritates me the most is people's reflection on the British Empire. Oh, always evil, always bad. It's like I can't accept that. I only learnt last year that Britain only colonized Nigeria because Nigerians refused to stop sending slaves to America. So imagine just the cost in blood and treasure of Britain having to do that, right?
Yeah.
And the unique thing about the British Empire, inspired by William Wilberforce, who was a Christian, a Protestant Christian, and whose brother was the Bishop of Oxford, Samuel Wilberforce. And the seminary I went to, because I was an Anglican priest first, the seminary I went to was his palace. He gave it to the church. And so it was ended by the blood and treasure of British people, the slave trade worldwide, on the high seas, dealing with Barbary pirates as well, and all the rest of it. That is something to be proud of. So it's a mixed bag, right? It's complicated, and that complexity is a good thing to talk about, because the sort of taboo of let's not tread on any risk hurting people's feelings means that these things are not taught well or expressed or considered, which would lead to deeper understanding and healing.
Well, world history is complicated, and we need to dive in and discuss it more.
Well, yeah, and it has to be discussed, I think, in an open and honest way. Another flaw of human nature is it's hyper emotional.
You got to put on your big boy and big girl pants.
Yeah,
have a serious conversation.
It does come down to having the maturity to be able to discuss things you don't like without having to emotionally respond or react to all of it. There is a certain objectivity. Stoicism can be applied.
And your ICU, you said it at the start. That's the heart of it.
Yeah.
Your own ICU, it's logs and specs.
Yeah.
It's the sort of, and the great question to ask, I think, when you look at any history, good or ill, is compared to what? That's the question that gets lost. Oh, this thing was terrible. Okay, compared to what in that time? There's healing there. Western culture's not universally been brilliant, but it's also not universally been bad.
No, I can't disagree.
Brandon's being polite. I think he had a couple of other questions.
Yeah, Brandon, let's
Thank
go.
you.
Let's do it. I know he's just chopping at the bit.
We'll run with it.
Yeah,
so.
he will. He likes hearing us talk, though. Don't let him kid you.
Gotta butt in, Brandon.
Okay, so Bishop kind of asked a similar question a couple minutes ago, but I wanted to ask it in a different context. Based on the Proverbs that either the ones that you posted or published in your book versus ones you haven't, what do you think is the most needed proverb for our day and age? Like, not really specific to a generation, but just people in general.
That goes back to what I was asked about a few moments ago about, we're all woven together like one big mat from Madagascar. You might have heard of the African concept of Ubuntu. That just literally means humanity. And the BNT part means human, and the U is an abstract prefix, humanity. But it's richer and deeper and more complex than that. It's interdependence. I am because we are. We are because I am. And Dr. King put it slightly differently. I cannot be what I am meant to be until you are what you are meant to be. You cannot be what you are meant to be until I am what I am meant to be. The Malagasy in Madagascar have a different word to describe the concept. It's fihavanana. You hear the Hawaiian. The Polynesian.
That's remarkable. I did not know there was a connection there. That's interesting.
Well, again, I don't know if there's an explicit connection, but there was Bantu settlement in Madagascar. Again, they're a mix of people, and the idea of fihabanam. I had two Malagasy consultants, and they were like, there's a sacredness that, if violated, is it's just taken very seriously.
Yeah,
the sacredness to all life.
Agreed.
I am. Do you think that's the ultimate goal here? Then is that these proverbs, by your inspiration to write this book and share this wisdom, and with the added benefit of finding parallel within the authority of Scripture. Do you find it's really about one discovering oneself, that these things teach us something about our own nature that we can maybe even use in truly in a Zen sense, as like a Zen code, to like spontaneously awaken to a more developed understanding of things?
Absolutely. It's embedded. Taken together, embedded in the Proverbs, is a sense of right relationship with yourself, with others, and with God.
Yeah.
The Proverbs address all those things in an African way.
Yeah.
There's a fundamental, the golden rule. All the great faith traditions have it. There's a poster that you sometimes see in places of worship showing the golden rule in different faith traditions. The Jewish one is that which is hateful to you, do not do unto others. That is the whole of Torah. The rest is commentary. Go study. Love that part.
Yeah, it is
Love that
wonderful.
part.
Yeah, that's
Just
good.
study.
But so the next time you see that poster, look for the African versions. Chances are you won't find them.
Yeah.
I don't know why they're overlooked, but I'm sure I missed a few, given the vastness and complexity of Africa. But I found 7 African versions of the Golden Rule. There's one from Madagascar. If you know what hurts yourself, you know what hurts others.
That's as simple and practical as it gets. It's so logical.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's practical, but it's compassionate too.
Yeah.
It teaches how to see others.
Yeah.
Right. And one of my Malagasy consultants, Melody Ramanandra, I love their names. Said in her language, the word for hurt used in that proverb is pinch.
Oh.
And this one is used with children. I don't know about you, but I hear a mother's voice.
Yeah.
Don't pinch somebody. You know what a pinch feels like. So it's about achieving right relationship. And I think they show compassion, wisdom, but they're deeply practical.
Yeah.
At the same time.
And that's I think their real value is again getting back to something that's so truly African is its accessibility. It's malleability, that it sort of works with any system. It can find its way into any system and be applicable because it is just so universal from its the core of its own nature. I think that's its value to me in this because I mean, look, as a pastor myself, okay, when I'm trying to teach Christian concepps, the more complex they get, the more I lose people because they're not relatable. If you're not going through deep theology training, I mean, these things are just so ethereal and so outside of the range of what most people understand that unless you're really into it, and I mean, fortunately, this audience is really into it, so I can talk that way with them. But, when I'm trying to talk to a client, for example, who might be, coming to Jesus for the first time, this is not the way to go. You have to keep it relatable, and high level theology is not relatable. It's wonderful once you have the intellectual capacity to understand it, but until you're there, you're not going to get anything of it. So I think what the real value is here is that these are almost innately understood. You don't really need any explanation. It's there. It's all
universal truths that go across cultures. I mean, we're all having a human experience.
Yeah.
Right.
We all want the same answers. We all want to be loved. We all want to love. We all want to know what love is.
Right.
So it's just
innately
collection of
human.
It's a human experience.
That human experience was not necessarily always recognized.
Yeah.
For Africans and African Americans. So, it's worth knowing this heritage.
It is.
But it's eminently relatable for anybody, I think.
It really is. I mean, I think anybody from any culture could recognize or see themselves in these things that you've shared with us, and you've only given us a little fraction of what's in your book. People are going to have to go.
Get it. I love it.
Yeah, people are going to have to go buy that book.
It's in my cart now. I just haven't pushed the button.
It's on Australian Amazon, I think. It's on Australian Amazon.
We put the Amazon link in the chat.
Yep.
And I think people need to go pick up a copy and study it and commit to it. Don't fall into dismissing it as anecdotal just because there's sayings or whatever. I mean, there's truth here. There's deep wisdom here that expands through the ages. It's timeless, and anybody anywhere can recognize it. I think that's its beauty. And I mean, when Brandon presented this show to me, I didn't know what to expect. But, that I just think that this has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. I'd like to, we got a few minutes left. I'd like for you, though, to perhaps we kind of maybe already touched on it, so let us know if we have, but is there any one specific thing or part of this book that you find to be the most important thing, the one message that if you could only take one message and share it with this audience, what would you want that to be?
We're all related. We all belong. That's Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to violate the premise of your question, a second thing would be Sankofa, the Ashanti view about learning from the past in order to go forward.
There's that history lesson
symbol,
again.
Yep.
The Sankofa, the symbol is a backward-looking bird.
Yeah. And see that's again, we got the components to the solution of the world's problems, right? Communication, understanding, and wisdom of history, I think is one of them. And of course, love and compassion. You can't do anything without that.
Right.
You Jamie was sharing something on the network today about fear, and I would say that, a Christian cannot live in fear because a Christian is called to live in love, and they're not compatible realities. You can't be one and maintain the other.
Love
you have
has
to choose.
no room for fear.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I would say that they're mutually exclusive. You either you succumb to fear or you succumb to love. You can't do both, and they can't coexist. And
love drives out all fear.
Yeah, it does. And you have to be willing to let it. I think this world right now, it's running scared, and being afraid is big business.
Yeah.
Keeping people in fear is big business.
Just watch your 24-hour neuse cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't matter which one is your particular poison.
Pick your poison.
The liberal or conservative media, it lives on fear, and it makes big money, big profits at your expense. So I would encourage people to, this is where these Proverbs and Scripture, get the book, and learn how to overcome fear. Do you know any, before we end this show, Chris, anything about overcoming fear?
I'm looking real quick. There was one from Haiti about it's comparable to love casting out fear. I'll do a quick check, but I just want to share how delighted I am to have been invited. It's been a joy. I thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you all. Did Brandon have another question?
He probably did.
I'm good.
Real love knows not danger.
Oh,
There you go.
there it is.
Yep, there it is.
That's exactly it. That is it.
That's
That's it.
That's precisely it.
John 4:18 right there.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Chris, any way that the audience can reach out to you? Do you have any websites, anything you'd want to share? Here's your chance.
Can I share my email?
Please do.
It's Christopher Morehouse, leaves off the SE at the end. It's ChristopherMorehou@gmail.com. I will Zoom with your church or book group, or because I can talk about this for hours, and I've enjoyed the opportunity.
We've all enjoyed you. I can tell you that it's been a wonderful time. We thank you for spending your evening with us. And
Kind of you.
yeah,
Kind of you.
we'd love to
Thanks
have,
for reaching out.
yeah, we'd love to have you back
Absolutely.
on sometime. That would be great. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Father Chris. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Jamie. And thanks to all of you, our moderators, who have kept you safe through the season. We appreciate each and every one of you. It's been a fantastic season, and we'll be back on July 8th with the first of 2 summer specials. That is going to be one of our guests who's going to be talking about trauma. She was originally booked earlier in this season, but because of technical issues, that episode never aired, and so we had to push it off to another another date. So she's coming back. We're not going to miss it. That's going to be July 8th for our next show. I want everybody to have a fantastic, wonderful, and safe, blessed summer. Okay? Be kind out there, because the world has enough toxicity in it. Do your best to try to understand another person's point of view. You don't have to accept or agree with it. You just have to understand it. That's it. That's all you have to do. If we could teach our miserable politicians that one lesson, we'd be okay. This world would move on in a much better direction than it is right now. But it's never too late. You have that power today. If I could give any message to young people, it would be that one. Take that to heart and do something with it, please. Pick up the slack, because we're not doing too well right now. Anyway, that's it. All right. I'll see you out in the summer. And until then, I'll see you out there in the ether. God bless everyone.